Welcome to the Greater Central Florida Multifamily Investor Group, where we focus on investing where it makes sense. I just want to welcome everyone to the Greater Central Florida Multifamily Investors Group meeting, where we focus on investing where it makes sense. I'm your host, Ismael Reyes. So happy to be here. The goal of this group is to learn from and help each other do multifamily deals. The focus is on Greater Central Florida, but not just investing here, but partnering with people that are in the area on deals elsewhere. We got deals right now and done deals in Georgia. We've done deals in Alabama. We're looking at some stuff in Texas. So a lot of places, right? Doesn't mean it necessarily needs to be here, but we definitely want to invest in places where it makes the most sense to do it from a business standpoint. But it's always good to connect with people that we are relatively comfortable with and maybe can meet in person. And that's one of these places here in Greater Central Florida. But today we're here to talk about 1031 exchanges. Simply put, a 1031 exchange allows you, the investor, to sell one property and use the equity to purchase new property with 100% capital gains taxes. Our expert here, Dave, our distinguished guest who's going to talk to us about the basics, the strategic use of 1031s, and how to use 1031 exchanges in passive syndication. All right, Dave is the founder and CEO of the 1031 Investor. He's a degreed accountant and a serial real estate investor. I like that, serial real estate investor, who is a qualified intermediary and consultant for tax savings strategies, such as a 1031 exchange and a Section 121 homestead exemption. He provides strategy consulting and 1031 exchange qualified intermediary services that have helped investors from around the world use these powerful tools to build their U.S. portfolio, defer all taxes, and comply with IRS requirements. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Dave. Good to have you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I think we'll just kind of jump right into it. Do we have this set up so I can share a screen? There we go. Everybody's got it, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's great to be here with you guys tonight. I'm excited because tonight especially, I kind of wanted to tweak things because the 1031 exchange really does have some difficulties when it comes time to transition maybe from, something like Yamil, where you are, from single family investing into passive positions in multifamily projects, or Trevor's, you're starting to raise money for something you're doing. And 1031 doesn't work real well, but I think that as we talk through what it is and the nuts and bolts of it, we'll start to see a couple things come out that are opportunities for those of you that want to jump in to syndications in any form and are looking maybe to go from a more active to a more passive real estate investing career. So, hey, feel free to write questions in the Q&A at any point in time. My studio engineer, Vicky, who's way smarter than I am, can help us out. Ismael, we can also just have you read them as well. So we'll make this thing free flow and let her rip. How's that sound? So tonight, what we're going to do, I love the why and the when question. How is just about pushing paper, but it's the when and it's the why. Do I want to use a 1031 exchange? So we're going to learn why you want to do it. Then we're going to learn how do you do it throughout your life cycle as a real estate investor. We'll talk a little bit about how to invest in passive syndications. And just because I love to, I want to give you some bonus material that hopefully, if you don't know about it, is going to rock your paradigm and lead you to some new things. Now, what's the best thing about Justice Leonard Hand? It's his eyebrows. Come on. But Justice Leonard Hand was also one of these Supreme Court justices when the 1031 exchange was put into the tax code. And as you can guess, it was a long, long time ago. This is not a new loophole. This is not a dodge that someone invented. 1031 is one of the original parts of the code since 1920. And in 1920, the attitude of the government and the courts was quite a bit different than it is today. Back then, there was the idea that taxes are kind of a necessary evil. We have to do it, but that doesn't mean that we should try to increase it or give more. I know it doesn't feel like it's that way these days, but that was the original attitude. And so the 1031 exchange, as this unfolds tonight, you're going to end up thinking about this as less of a way to avoid taxes and more of a way that's going to allow the government to incentivize your behavior. Now, think about the difference between those two. Yes, the government needs to collect taxes so we can build roads and hospitals and all the other stuff we need to do. But what it really exists to do, even more importantly, is to incentivize and steer your behavior. And if you behave in certain ways, then you will be rewarded with a lower tax bill. That's how this whole thing works. So I want you to kind of have that mindset. It's a little contrary to what you normally think, but that's what we're dealing with when we're talking about parts of the federal tax code that deal with real estate investing. Now, here's the first of the bonus material. There's actually two parts of the code that talk about real estate taxation. And the first one is section 121, which has to deal with your primary residence. If you live in a house that you have owned for 2 out of the 5 years prior to selling it, then as a single individual, you will get to take the first $250,000 of profit tax-free. If you're married, it goes up to $500,000. Now, I'm not talking tax deferred. I'm not talking gotta pay it back. All you've got to do is go and live in a piece of property, buy it, move into it, live in it, 2 years later, sell it, and the first 250 or 500,000 is tax-free. Is there a better gig going in America? I mean, it's crazy, right? So let's do this. Just to keep you guys on your toes, we're going to do a coffee challenge. First person to write in the chat box or the Q&A box gets a free coffee if you give us the right answer. How many times in your lifetime can you exercise a 121 exemption? Do we want it in the chat or the Q&A? Chat box. Who's going to be first? Who wants free coffee?
Astor just put the letter D to get ahead of everyone.
Astor put the letter D. I don't know what the D stands for. I like the effort, but someone's got to give me an answer here.
Oh, we got answers. They're answering so fast.
Everybody's answering fast because you guys just figured out coffee's good. Anybody got it, Vic? Yamil said unlimited, which is true as long as you've not done it within 2 years of the last time. So basically the answer is once every 2 years. Now, National Association of Realtors tells us that you will generally buy a property and live in it for 5 to 8 years. So if all you do is what you would normally do, go buy a house, raise kids, move when you would, you're going to have 8 to 10 opportunities in your lifetime to sell a property and take the profits tax-free. What's the incentive? What behavior is the IRS trying to incentivize? Home ownership. And secondly, they want you to move every once in a while so the next homeowner coming up can afford to buy it, don't they? Where do you think starter homeowners are going to find their properties? It's the ones that you leave. So the IRS is going to reward you for that. Now, I tell you this because now we're going to forget about it for a second. But at the end of this, you're going to see that there's a pretty nice confluence with Section 1031. Section 1031 deals with the other type of real estate, investment real estate. Now remember, with 121, move into it, live in it for 2 years, it's tax-free. With the 1031 exchange, and that's actually just a quote from the code, but with the 1031 exchange, when you sell business or investment real estate, you get to, I'm going to add a word here, indefinitely defer payment of the tax that would normally be due on the sale. So 121 is your primary residence, it's tax-free. 1031 is investment real estate, and it's tax deferred. The tax doesn't go away. Does that all make sense to everybody? So that leads us to the question of, why would I want to use a 1031 exchange? I get why I want to use the primary residence. It's tax-free. But I run into this all the time. I got to pay the tax someday. Why not pay it now? Or it's too much effort. I'm just going to pay the tax. Because I made profit, I shouldn't mind paying tax. And actually, every once in a while, someone says, well, but if I pay the tax, then we could buy another library or build another section of highway. Nah, I really don't get that very often. But the point is, why would you want to do a 1031 if you're going to have to pay the tax someday anyways? And the answer is threefold. Number one, because what would happen if you went to your accountant and said, I'm not going to contribute to my IRA this year because I'm going to have to pay the tax anyways? Would they put you in handcuffs till they had a chance to talk at you for a while? Absolutely they would. Because what is it about an IRA? It lets you defer the tax so you can make money on the deferred tax as long as it's deferred, right? So the 1031 acts just like an IRA, but outside your IRA. Number two, here's the teaser. You don't always have to pay it ever. Now, to get the rest of that story, as Paul Harvey would say, you got to stay till the end of this. But here's number three. Let's show you. Two investors. They're going to start with exactly the same property, sold for exactly the same profit. They're going to buy exactly how much property they can at the same leverage point. They're going to hold it the same amount of time for the same amount of appreciation. Everything is identical, except investor A is going to do 1031 exchanges. So when you look at column 4, how much tax are they going to pay when they sell that property for a $100,000 gain? 0. Because why? It's deferred. They still owe it, but it's over there in column 7. They owe $20,000. Now, look at investor B. Investor B pays the tax when they sell the property, just like a good American. So they don't owe any tax, but look at the 5th column. Because investor A did not pay the tax, they have $100,000 to put down. And at 20% down, that buys them a $500,000 property, doesn't it? Investor B only has $80,000. So they can put 20% down on a $400,000 property. Does that make sense? Everybody caught up? That's what they're going to do. 5 years later, they now go to sell that property at the same exact rate of appreciation. Why did investor A sell for more? Because they bought more to start. And when you're dealing with percentages, 5% of a larger number is a much larger number than 5% of a lower number. And that, my friends, is how the rich keep getting richer. Because once you keep getting more and more, percentage increases really matter. Investor A, again, does a 1031 exchange. Now, they owe almost $50,000 in tax, but they're not letting them borrow. They're not letting it bother them because that gives them $238,000 to go buy more than $1 million in real estate. Investor B, not doing too bad. They don't owe anything, But because they've only got 168,000 after tax, they can only buy a property for 842. 10 years. Now we start to see, don't we? Investor A, once again, defers the tax. So they're kind of maybe, some folks would start to worry. All right, so we were talking about Investor A and B here. Investor B's got a lot of deferred tax, which might worry them. But because they're hanging on to that deferred tax, they can buy almost $3 million of real estate. Investor B doesn't owe any tax, but they can only buy $1.5 million. So you really start to see the amount of property they're able to purchase and control diverge, aren't we? Now, let's skip forward to 20 years of this. That's a good long time for any investing career. Investor A sells for their last 1031 and they owe $500,000 in tax, but they're able to purchase and control almost $12 million in real estate. Whereas investor B, who doesn't owe any tax, is only able to purchase about $4.5 million because they paid the tax, they don't have it available to purchase more property with. So by using the deferred tax dollars at the end of 20 years, you're able to control almost $8 million more of real estate than if you pay the tax as you go. What we call that is compound interest. And here's another coffee challenge for you. Let's see if there's any bright folks here. Who was it who called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world? Does anybody know? No good guesses?
Scott Kidd says Einstein. Emil says Einstein.
Scott, did you already get coffee?
Emil already got coffee.
All right, Emil, you're showing off the class too much. Scott said Albert Einstein. He gets coffee. By the way, Scott's my spirit animal anyways, because he's a boat guy. Part of our 1031 story that you're going to learn at the end of this is that we use the 1031 exchange and a couple other things I'll tell you about to end up purchasing tax-free a 53-foot sailboat and raising our 4 boys on it in the Keys and the Bahamas and both coasts of Florida. So I started out using these before I started doing them for others. So back to the story. Compound interest. Here's what Albert Einstein said in the rest of his quote. He said, those who understand it, like this example, will benefit from it. Those who don't will pay for it. And that's what this is literally just an opportunity for you to use deferred tax for your benefit. And then the additional money you make, again, is deferred, and you make money on the money you deferred, and then you make money on the money you deferred. And pretty soon it's a big, big deal. Now, we're not going to go into these too much tonight. I've got a YouTube channel with 32 videos that talks about these nitty-gritties, the requirements. But I want to blast through them real quick so we get to the fun stuff. Requirement number 1, and all of these have to be met, is it has to be real estate and it has to be investment real estate. The type doesn't matter, the location doesn't matter, and the numbers don't matter. So you could buy and sell anywhere in the United States. You can buy and sell any type of real estate as long as it's investment. And you can buy any numbers. Sell several, buy one, sell one, buy severals. So right away, that starts the wheels turning, doesn't it? Requirements number 2 and 3 have to do with timing. From the day you close your sale, you've got 45 days to identify potential replacements. You have a total of 180 days to complete your purchase. There's never going to be personal exceptions. And if you have not identified property by day 45, your exchange is done. If you're past day 45 and you get outbid for all the properties on your list, you're toast. You can wait until and see if one of those other properties comes back on the market, but those are the only properties you're going to choose. So these timing rules are very, very rigid. You have to use the services of an unrelated third party. Now, that's what we do. We're a qualified intermediary. We exist to document the 1031 and to hold the proceeds in between the sale and the purchase, because the IRS does not let you touch the money. And the IRS says that we have to be involved prior to the closing of your sale. So please, I get it every month, but don't close a property and then call me the next week, because we have to be in place prior to the closing of the sale. The only thing we're doing, documenting the exchange and holding the proceeds. Now, we could go way into deep weeds on this, but in general, the taxpayer for the old property has to be the taxpayer for the new property. So if you own the property in your name and you sell it, you have to take title in your name because the property was reported on your personal tax return. If you own the property in a limited partnership, or if you own the property as a corporation, then that corporation has to sell and it has to buy. Here's challenge number one with syndications. If you are an LP in a syndication, you don't own real estate. So you can't do a 1031. You own a membership interest in an entity that owns real estate. So you're not selling and buying real estate, first of all. And secondly, when it comes time to sell the syndication, you're not selling real estate. You're not the taxpayer. Now, the syndication can do a 1031 exchange. And Ismael, this is one of the things that we kind of started to talk about just a little bit, that we're now starting to see more and more of. And that is that syndications themselves are getting their investors involved and committed, not just to the current project, but to the next project, so that the syndication can sell, do a 1031 exchange, and then purchase, and all of the limited partners simply go along with them. Or if one or two of them want to be bought out, then the syndication can buy them out. But the syndication is going to be doing the 1031. Did I see a question from someone there?
He watched a series of badass.
I don't know if we heard you on there.
Yeah, I couldn't hear the question.
So I guess my question, just so I understood, and I think you answered it, but essentially, if we have a group of investors and a few do not want to do the 1031 exchange into something else, you could essentially have the attorney buy them out off of their equity piece, and those that stay in at that point would just roll over, because of course it's the LLC that's doing the selling and the buying. Is that accurate?
That's it. That's exactly right.
Okay.
The IRS doesn't care who the members of the entity are. They only care that the taxpayer entity does the exchange. So that can be a real nice opportunity to restructure your LP. It can also be a great opportunity because as a syndicator, you're going to be spending less of your time raising capital because you got a bunch of people that are just going with you through life. And that can be a good thing. Now, the last of the requirements are the reinvestment requirements. In general, in order to defer all tax, you must purchase at least as much as your net sale, and you must use all of the proceeds in the purchase or purchases. So let's say you sold a property for $320,000, and there's $20,000 of closing costs and commissions. Your net sale is $300,000. That's how much you have to purchase in order to defer all tax. Now, let's say that there was a $100,000 mortgage. That means that you would generate $200,000 of cash that goes into your exchange account. So to defer all tax, you would need to purchase at least $300,000 in real estate using $200,000 of cash proceeds. Opportunity number 2 for the syndicator, and I love this one, and that is you can split up your proceeds any way that you want. So what if you took $175,000 and bought a small property for cash and used the other $25,000 as a down payment on a property to get to your $300,000? You sold one, you bought two, you purchased at least $300,000. One of them is this free and clear $175,000 property. Now, a couple of things just happened. First of all, you recession-proofed a bunch of your portfolio because you've got one free and clear. All you got to do is just adjust the rents to keep the lights on. But you also got the bigger ROI from having the second property highly leveraged. And because you have a free and clear property, how easy would it be if you found the right syndication to immediately do a cash out refinance and take the cash proceeds from the refinance, which are tax-free, and use that to invest in your syndication. And at the end of that day, you have a property with a mortgage on it. You have two properties that are rental properties with mortgages on them. And you have a third investment in a syndication. It's not a bad little gig when you can structure things the right way. So that's the kind of creative thinking that you can get into, following the basic requirements, but still using them to your advantage to move from what I would call a real estate asset into a securities asset, as in a syndication. That makes sense? So how do we use these things? How do we design them? Well, we talked about this a little bit. The number of properties doesn't matter. So if I've got a large number of properties, because I've been an active landlord and I'm getting tired, it's time to slow things down, or it's time to invest in some syndications. I could sell 5 $100,000 properties and go buy one $400,000 property for cash and $100,000 property with a mortgage. I just really reduced my management, didn't I? Or I could sell 10 $100,000 properties and go buy my first $1 million multi, couldn't I? Which I could then turn around and syndicate if I wanted to. All sorts of possibilities, because it doesn't matter how many you sell or buy. And of course, the exact opposite is true as well. I could sell one property and use the high appreciation and cash from the sale to purchase multiple smaller properties. Yamil, you were probably in this mode, because I think if I'm not mistaken, you were the person that's got 5 right now. So it's very easy. Sell a property, use the proceeds as down payments on 2 or 3. Can be a wonderful opportunity. Retirement needs are basically addressing the need to either slow down and go passive or change. Okay, so retirement needs, let's talk about that. The person up in Ohio that, say, has got a portfolio of properties and they're a couple years away from retiring can start to sell those properties, which all share a common trait. Do you know what that is, Ismael?
Say that one more time.
The common trait that all those properties in Ohio share It's in their garage, every one of them. Well, you know what? You've been down here too long. Every one of them has a snow shovel.
Oh, yeah.
Sell those properties and use the proceeds to position yourself using the 1031 exchange into maybe vacation rentals or rental properties in Florida, someplace where you're thinking you want to retire to. And then 2 years later, when you're finally ready to move, I'm going to sell my primary residence. And remember, that money's tax-free. And I'm going to move to Florida. That tax-free cash is the start on retirement. And I just moved down to be near where my properties are. But can I throw a little gasoline on that fire? Where are you going to move? What if where you moved was into one of your investment properties? The IRS tells you that to do a 1031 exchange, you have to sell investment real estate and you have to buy investment real estate, but it does not have to stay investment forever. So you could sell the property in Ohio, buy a really nice vacation rental in Sarasota, and a couple of years later, convert it into your primary residence. The money from your sale of your old primary goes in your pocket. The conversion is not a taxable event. And as long as you live in that property, you'll never pay the tax. And if you live in that property long enough to qualify again, you won't get all the profit tax-free, but you will get to prorate it between the period that it was rented and the period that it was used as your primary residence. So when you finally sell, part of that is going to be tax-free. I mean, that's just crazy awesome, right? Here's one step further. Well, the passive strategies we've discussed a couple times, and they all surround concentrating your portfolio so that you can then do a cash out refinance and use the cash from the refinance to invest in the syndication. Or, Ismael, like you were talking about, finding the few syndications that are out there that will let you buy as a tenant in common. There's not very many of them. Most of them will say, we can only sell you a membership interest in the LLC, and that will work. But if you find somebody who says, I can sell you 5% of the property that the LLC owns so that you and the syndication become tenants in common, that's perfectly fine by 1031. Either one of these strategies will allow you to slowly position yourselves into passive syndications without triggering a tax event. And you know those refinances? What if one of those properties you refinanced was simply a property you moved into that you were going to live in throughout retirement? You've got your money working for you, and you're not worried about selling it anyways. So that's a good one to take out debt on. And the cash out refinance for a primary residence is generally at a very, very favorable interest rate and fixed terms. This just occurred to me. But if you're able to cash out refinance a property that you've converted from investment into your primary, you could get, I think the last one I did was 30-year fixed financing, 3.5% down, 3.2%. Now, compare that with the promised returns of any syndication. Would you like to have access to that kind of cash at those terms? I know I would. Matter of fact, it's kind of got my wheels turning. Let's go one step further down this. Let's talk about after retirement, estate planning. Mom and dad or grandma and grandpa sell the family farm. The family farm is made up of two types of properties. It's the primary residence, which that portion would be tax-free, right? And it's the family farm, which is investment property, 1031able. So grandma and grandpa went to their 3 children and said, you're going to inherit this. Would you be willing to pick out a property and manage it for us as long as we lived, and you get it when we die? Well, kid said, sure, we take care of that for you. So they did that. Now, look at everything that happened when they did this. They 1031 exchanged the land, so they deferred all the tax on that. They sold their primary residence, and that gave them the money to buy the RV so they could travel around for a few years and have fun. The kids picked out the property that they wanted to manage. So grandma and grandpa had very motivated managers who were wanting to keep the properties nice, generate the income for mom and dad, and take care of it because it was going to be theirs. My favorite one is that grandma figured out real quick that every trip to go see the grandkids in their new RV was a business write-off to go see their investment properties. And lastly, when they died, their children got the properties at what is called a step-up in basis, which means all of that deferred tax. Remember investor A that owes $470,000 in tax? When they die and their properties go to their heirs, that tax disappears. It is not paid by anybody. And the heirs get the property and they get to start over doing it again. So for that person who wants to say, just pay the tax, you're going to have to pay it anyways. Do you have a good answer for them? I know that I do. It's called the 4 Ds of 1031 investing. You guys all ready to write these down? D number 1, defer. As long as you own a property, you never pay the tax. As long as any time you sell that property, you 1031 into another property, you'll never pay the tax. D number 2, know what it is? Defer. Because as long as any time you sell the property, you can move it to different locations. You can move it into different numbers. You can create passive investment streams, all doing the 1031 exchange, and you'll never pay the tax. Was that 2 Ds? No, the 3rd D is defer. Because there's opportunities for you to, as you go through life, convert those properties from investment into your primary residence, and then hold them and at least get a proration of the gain tax-free. I have a client on St. Pete Beach that has 3 identical condos side by side. His retirement plan, he's going to sell his house. He's going to move into the first one, convert it into his primary. Then he's going to live in it until, as his wife said, it's time to redecorate, and then we're just going to move instead. So he's going to sell that property, and he'll take a proration. Yes, he's going to pay a little bit of tax. But if he was delivering pizzas for Domino's or working at Publix, he'd be paying a little bit of tax as well, wouldn't he? This way, his retirement job is living in a nice place looking at the beach. Where's he going to move? Into one of the other 2. And he'll do it again and again. That's the 3rd D of defer. Until finally, the 4th D. What is it, Marilyn? No, oh, I thought you were with me. It's die. not defer, die. Because finally at the end, my heirs will get the property at a step up in basis and the tax goes away. So in Dave's mind, there's never a reason to pay another penny in capital gains tax to the federal government. Use it for yourself. Now, that wonderful little confluence, right, of section 121 and 1031. Here's another twist on it. What if you've got more than $500,000 in gain on your primary residence? Well, remember, there's two ways to treat this. There's the 1031 exchange, which is where you sell investment property, buy investment property, and you get to indefinitely defer the tax. There's also the 121 exception, where all you have to do is live in the property for 2 years. And when you sell, you get $250,000 or $500,000 tax-free. But you could move out of that 121 house and then rent it for almost 3 more years. And when you sell it, is it an investment property? Yep. But did you still live in it for 2 out of the previous 5? You sure did. So you would get the full 121 exemption, tax-free. But you got the appreciation of 3 more years as an investment property and the cash flow, et cetera, et cetera. You do have to recapture depreciation in that scenario. Now, what if it's your primary residence? And we'll use that other example. You've got more than $500,000 in gain. Why don't you reverse it? Move out of the primary residence, turn it into investment for a year, then sell it. And because it's now investment property, you could do a 1031 exchange. And what you'll do is you'll take boot, which would be taxable, of $500,000. But because you still lived in it for 2 out of the previous 5, that $500,000 is tax-free. And then the rest of that profit goes into your new investment properties, tax deferred. See how you could flip and flop back and forth? I mean, that's exactly what we did throughout our moves from Colorado to Connecticut to Florida to the sailboat using 1031 and 121 confluences. And it's, in my mind, it's the best tool going. So with that, let's open up for questions and see.
Yeah, on one of your transitions, I missed a piece there for, I guess, on the syndication side, where essentially if you sell, you can actually use some of the money into to invest as an LP in a syndication, and still use some of the other money to invest in other acquisitions, all kind of part of the same exchange.
Yeah, there's 2 ways to do that. So now the key, of course, is you have to buy real estate. So you couldn't just take sales proceeds and go buy into an LP. So that's not going to work. But what you could do is complete the 1031 and buy one of your replacement properties for cash. Then cash out, refinance that property and invest in the LP.
Gotcha. Okay.
Or do a partial exchange. Take out some money to invest in the LP. You pay tax on it, but you'd still shelter the rest of the tax in the 1031.
Got it.
We could do a 1031. I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yep. Gotcha. Yeah, is this Ismael?
Yes. So let me understand this. So let me give you this the scenario. What I did, I sold my primary, and I moved into a rental. I had the rental for already 3 years. So if I live at my investment property for 2 years, can I do a 121 or I have to do a 1031?
Had you ever done a 1031 exchange to buy that investment property?
No.
Beautiful. So when you do a 1031, there's this added 5-year ownership
Okay.
component. You don't have to worry about that. So how long did you use it for investment before you moved into it?
3 years.
And how long have you lived in it now?
Not even like 6 months.
Okay, let's go down the road to where you lived in it for 2 years.
Okay.
So we do the 5-year look back. Did you live in it for 2 out of the 5 years prior to selling it? And the answer is yeah. You used it as a rental for 3, then you lived in it for 2. So when you sell that, you get to prorate the profit between when it was rented and when it was your primary. So since you lived in it for 2/5 of the time you owned it, you would get 40% of the profit tax-free.
Oh.
You would pay tax on 60% of the profit, and you would have to recapture depreciation. But you get some of it tax-free. Now, let's say you really love that place, so you lived in it for 7 years and then sold it. You'd get 7/10 of the profit, or 70% tax-free. So you can see how you can really start to ratchet up the amount that's tax-free, right?
Right. What happens if you don't want to sell it? You just want to keep renting it? Yeah. So my wife said, what happens if we don't want to sell it? We just want to keep renting it. I mean,
and turn it back into a rental?
Yes.
Okay. So you lived in it for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then you decide, gosh, we love this as a rental. Let's rent it again. And so you rent it for 3 more years.
Okay.
How long did you own it in total? 8 years, right?
Yep.
Did you still live in it for 2 out of the 5 years prior to selling it? Yep, because you lived in it for 2, then you rented it for 3. So you would get, in this case, 2/8 or 25% of the gain tax-free, because you lived in it for 2 years and you owned it for 8.
But that's if I sell it out. If I sell it, but I could still sell it and do a 1031. I could defer all tax.
That is correct.
Okay.
If it's being used as a rental,
right,
when you sell it. But I can't leave you with just that. I got to make it sweeter. As long as you as long as you comply with both parts of the code, you qualify to do both. So in that last scenario, did you live in it for 2 out of the previous 5? Yes. So 25% of the profit would be tax-free. Is it an investment property when you sell it? Yes. So it qualifies for 1031 treatment.
Oh, wow.
So you get 25% in your pocket tax-free, tax defer the rest of it. I can't make it any.
I'm here. So I know that to do a 1031, there is a time allotment. You have to do the 1031 within a certain amount of time. You said obviously not to contact you after the sale because that defeats the purpose of the 1031. So can you go over the participants, what that time is, and whether there is an extension to apply? Let's say you provide, you identify a property to 1031 into. What happens if you can't close on time within that deadline?
Yeah, so the best time to get your intermediary involved is as soon as you have a contract for sale, because all of our work is done as part of that closing. So that's the best time to get us involved. So all the 1031 documentation is part of the closing, which means day 1, the closing day is day 1 of your exchange. From that day, you've got 45 more days to identify your potential replacements. Now, if you identify a property, it falls apart, and you're still within your 45 days, no big deal. Just go find more properties. But if you are past day 45, you cannot modify that list any further. There will be no personal exceptions or extensions. If you can't close on it, the IRS does not care. They don't care if you actually buy it. All they care is that you've identified it so they can limit you to that property. And honestly, one of the places where the second part of the rule is that you have 180 days to close. So as you can see, that's not such a big deal. The 45 days is the biggest deal. I usually tell people in this market, you want to try to be under contract before day 45 passes. As a matter of fact, if you can get it under contract before your old property closes, that's perfectly fine. And that's even better. You're just trying to hedge risk. But where I see these things recently falling apart are where someone is named pre-construction. I'm going to buy a house that's under construction now. I've got 180 days, no problem at all. So they named that property. It's now day 90, and the builder just realized that every month it doesn't have 45 days in it. And they're really, really sorry, but you're going to be delayed another 3 or 4 months. Hurricane comes through, whatever. And when that happens, the IRS says, nope, by the end of day 180. If that property is not able for you to take title, your exchange is dead. Every once in a while, there will be an exception for a major catastrophe. So like for the pandemic, there's about a 6-month process. But my gosh, we've been fighting this thing for 2 years, and there was only about a 6-month extension for hurricanes, wildfires, every once in a while. But they're very limited in scope. And even if the president declares an emergency, the IRS doesn't always agree. So my best advice, extensions are nice, things to wish for, but don't ever count on them.
Thank you.
You bet.
Dave, did you talk at all about, I'm sorry, go ahead, Vesey, go ahead.
Oh, just wanted to ask real quick, and I think I am, by virtue of what you just shared, I think I know the response, but let's say you're in a syndication, the sponsor agreed to set up a TIC. If for whatever reason the property closing is delayed beyond day 180, doesn't mean you effectively forfeited the 1031?
Yeah, if you're going to buy into that syndication as a TIC, it's like another piece of real estate. You got 180 days.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to ask about reverse 1031 exchanges. I don't know if you covered that and maybe I missed it, but I've heard the term and I'm not exactly sure how that would work.
Yeah, I didn't cover it specifically. They can be handy, but most times they're more trouble than they're worth. A reverse exchange does not change the statutory order. The statutory order of your 1031 is that you have to close your sale before you close your purchase. Has to happen. What a reverse exchange does is it allows you to control your new property before your old property closes. Actually, Vesey, let's use your example. You're wanting to buy into a syndication as a TIC. They're willing to sell you the TIC. You're getting close to day 180. And it's not going to be, well, actually, that's not going to work. Let me give a different example. You find your perfect property first, and you want to buy it, but your old property hasn't closed. You can have us create an entity that's called an exchange accommodating title holder. We take title to the new property. Now, the problems, you've still got to provide the money. So many times it's kind of problematic where that money comes from. Secondly, we can only hold that new property for 180 days. So you're never going to get more than 180 days. So if we were to take title, say to a new lot that the contractor is going to build a property on, it's got to be done in 180 days. So again, that's not going to work. Where it can work is, let's say you need to buy a multifamily property for $750 and it needs $250,000 in improvements. We could buy that property, and while we hold it, you put the $250,000 into improvements in it. Now, what's it worth? $1 million. $750 acquisition, $250 improvements. So you could sell your $1 million property and you use the proceeds then to purchase that, and you defer all tax. So it's a nice way of using the improvements, of being able to use the improvements to include them in your 1031. But the fact that you've got to provide the financing makes it pretty tricky. And these things can be $6,000 to $10,000 more than just a regular exchange. So if you're looking at a regular exchange for less than $1,000 or something like that, you see there's a lot of ways why you'd want to try to avoid them at all possible. Anybody else?
So Dave, on the 1031 or correction, the tenant in common, what is the hesitation from a syndicator's perspective for having them? It sounds like it's not a lot of them that do. Why is that? Is it because it's hard? Is it because it puts some limitations on maybe selling or making decisions? I'm just trying to understand, and maybe you have the crowd here understand why that is, that it's not so common.
Well, I mean, as with anything, it's another level of complexity. It doesn't have to be that complex, but it's another level. And honestly, we're in an environment where very few people have to accept it because there's so much cash out there chasing deals. So even a little bit of complexity makes it not worth their while. Typically, the biggest problem, though, is with the financing, because a lender will not want to release part of the property that they can have under their first lien. And the lender also doesn't want to deal with multiple borrowers. So where we see it work is with situations where they've got in-house financing and they may be newer syndications that are having trouble raising funds, that kind of thing.
Anybody else? I haven't been checking the chat. Anybody else? Well, I guess that's it, Dave. I guess you covered the material so well that I think people are just going to have to go back and relook. I know there was a part there where I'm going to have to go and pay attention a little bit more with some of the nuance, because it is a little bit tricky jumping back and forth. But the beauty is that I can always get a hold of you.
Exactly. And they're on the screen. Easiest way to contact us is go to the1031investor.com. We've actually got a YouTube series of, I think it's like 32 videos that all break all of these topics down into like bite-sized, guaranteed to put you to sleep videos late at night.
Yeah, somebody asked, and I think it was posted on there once already. So for those that haven't been paying attention to the chat, copy the chat so you can get a hold. Make sure you got all the links of everyone there, and you can get a copy of the link to the YouTube channel.